right, guys, welcome back to Metagame Monday, one of my absolute favorite times a week, starting my Monday morning off with research, getting together the numbers, making sense of them, and thinking about how I want to lay it out to you guys. So, yeah, welcome to the, I believe, 6th iteration. Time blows by when you're having fun, and yeah, let's get straight into the action. Actually, before we do that, I just want to mention that my Eco Baronin Cup 1.0 Legacy Tournament has kicked off, and 16 players consists of Bosch and Roll, Eternal Weekend Champ, Larson, Eternal Weekend Champ, the most recent one, actually. They're duking out against 14 of my members, and people seem to be having a lot of fun. They're playing for cool prizes. 2.0 is already in the planning stage. I have already secured my next 2 special invites, and there's still room to play in that tournament. So if that sounds like something you want to do, play against cool players for cool prizes, being part of a cool community while supporting me, you should definitely check out my Patreon below. But without further ado, let's get into this week's results of Legacy, because there's actually a lot of small, intricate things to unpack here aside from just the raw numbers. So I want to first start off by saying that consigned to memory has been bugged alongside other, replicate offspring, that type of card where you basically can pay an extra amount of mana to copy. I did not see if replicate from Shattering Spree was the same, but I would imagine it was just a whole replicate mechanic, right? So what does that tell us when you cannot copy a consigned to memory? Which cards is that relevant for? Okay, so we have obviously the Mythics spawn with, the couple of cast triggers. We have Chalice of the Void in play. I play Reanimate, Chalice of the Void for 1 triggers. I replicate a consign to counter the Chalice trigger. I resolve my Reanimate. So basically, it's a lot of stuff against Eldrazi. So I jokingly said on Twitter that Eldrazi was very well positioned this week. Well, looking at the results, that wasn't really the case. So, but it's just interesting to mention that was kind of the dynamic that can happen when you play online Magic. In paper, a lot of other stuff can happen. What do I know? You lose your deck, or some judge call doesn't go your way, or your opponent's super slow play is not enforced, you end up with an unintentional draw, whatever. But online play and paper play has a different set of kind of stuff that can happen, basically. And bugs is for sure part of what can happen online. But let's get into things here. I will go through the numbers, and I will try and make sense of them, basically just like every time. But today we have some cool storylines for sure. So let's start off with the only thing certain. That is, the Daze decks will be a big player in the metagame. So we have 7 copies of Delver across these 5 top 8s. As usual, it's going to be 40 decks, as you can see here. 40 decks at 5 times 8. We have 7 Delver decks, 6 of them being classic Teamer, and 1 of them being Grixis. So Grixis, we've talked about this before. Grixis has higher card quality. Orcish Bowmaster is amazing. Molten Collapse is a great catch-all answer. But that deck has a worse mana base because you need to cast, red spells early. You need to cast black spells as well. So you can't really, let's call it, free roll the basic island in there, much like the Teamer version. And as long as Blood Moon is a threat in the metagame, we kind of have to think about that. So for now, I'm not interested in Grixis. I'm interested in Teamer, which is basically blue-red with a single tropical island. And I'm interested in Dimir. And speaking of Dimir, we also have a couple of Nethergoyf decks. Most popularly, those are called Dimir Tempo. I will say they're oftentimes, Tameo decks, Baleful Strix decks, Kaito decks, and at that point, it kind of blends into being a mid-range deck, which is my biggest concern about the deck, that it's simply hard to shut down games, and you end up losing to, your mono red opponent drawing, what do I know, Pyrogoyf, your Eldrazi opponent drawing a big Kozilek's command, or bad things can happen if the game goes long, right? That's why Delver should be looking to end the game as quickly as possible, basically to minimize the amount of time the opponent has to execute their game plan, because if the game is played within, 5 or 6 turns, the Delver deck is at a huge advantage. Cards like Daze are better, Wastelands are better. All of that stuff is very bread and butter when understanding Legacy and understanding who benefits from a shorter game, who benefits from a longer game. If I don't benefit from a longer game, how can I shorten the game? It's this kind of scales that you're trying to tip in your favor. So always very, very excited about exactly that dynamic. So a recurring theme has been that Dimir Reanimator has done incredibly well in these tournaments, converted, I don't know, +5 copies every week. But that wasn't the case this time around. So this column has 7 copies, but they're different graveyard decks. We have 3 fast Reanimator decks, we have 2 Dimir Reanimator decks, and then we have 2 Oops All Spells decks. So basically, you could say that Reanimator and Oops are the fast graveyard decks, those that are basically saying, if I win the die roll, I can do unspeakable things. If, you only play your dodgy Voidwalker turn 2 or whatever the case may be, that could be too late. You could be swimming with the fishes already. So I really like how this is a reaction to the reaction. We've talked about, we should play Dimir Tempo so we can main deck Nile Spellbomb. We should maybe think about main deck Dodgy Voidwalker out of Delver. All of these solutions to basically free-rolling main deck graveyard hate. And I'm pretty interested in the fact that Fast Reanimator, classic Faithless Looting, Unmasked, Shallow Grave type deck, has kind of been the solution to that, because with that deck and Oops All Spells can win before the opponent deploys their graveyard hate. So really love to see that, and Dimir Reanimator taking a backseat for at least a single week. I think that's just pretty awesome to see. So basically, the graveyard deck, those that are successful decided to be more fast in order to, play around the hate that people were adapting their decks with. So again, reactions to reactions. That's why Magic is fun, and that's why this series is never going to be boring. Always going to be some new stuff to uncover. So next column here, after talking about the graveyard decks, we actually have the comeback of Nadu. So now 5 copies out of the top 8, 5 out of 40, were Nadu decks. So first of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the 3 breakfast copies. Larson, one of the special invites for the Eco Cup, won the Legacy Showcase the week before with breakfast. When Magic players win tournaments, I'm talking about the first place, not second place, not third, not 7th place. When they win tournaments, people are more likely to just copy their deck. That's just how Magic works. Let's say I've been working 40 hours all week, been with the family, all of a sudden I find myself with 5 hours of free time on the weekend. And then I'm like, I have access to everything in Legacy. What should I play? Breakfast did well. This looks fun. Copy-paste, proven deck, proven formula, deck expert, working on it for years. It's good, right? It's good to trust that player. And that's kind of the tendency in Magic. Back in the day, we would call net decking. You're net decking. But you should just see it as somebody in China figured out a better way to, enhance performance or build a certain robot or machine at a factory. You want to get your hands on that recipe. Somebody in Italy is making the best spaghetti carbonara on the planet. You want to get your hands on that recipe, right? So it used to be a bit, I don't know, taboo, a little bit shameful, a little bit, Yeah, but these days, it's good to copy players' homework. It's good to get inspiration. It's good to trust people who have spent thousands of hours on a certain subject. I go to the doctor. He tells me, eat these pills. I will do it. I will trust authorities. So whether or not you can relate to those metaphors, I don't know. I'm spitballing here. So the point is, people copied a good deck, and it converted well. So what do you know? Good decks are good. What's more exciting, to me at least, is the 1 copy of Nadu's Cradle, which is basically the Elves deck, and then 1 copy of Bant Nadu, which is the mid-range deck that I have been working on and still have a guide over on my Patreon about. I really like that deck because it's so hard to pinpoint how do you crush that deck. You really don't. It's just a annoying deck with a lot of potential, threatening to kill you out of nowhere with a combo. So I really like that deck, and I should probably get back to it. I really enjoyed playing it when I played it a lot and subated a few challenges. So yeah, Nadu's back. So we'll get into that later with 5 copies of Nadu here. We've had weeks with 0, weeks with 1. I'm talking about the full playset, of course. So yeah, Nadu's back. Pretty awesome to see. I will say this. Breakfast is still a graveyard deck, so we could theoretically put them over here. So let's just think about that for later, that Breakfast is a way to you know, win out of the graveyard, so your graveyard hit becomes even better. Next column here, first of all, the bread and butter 3 or 4 copies of Blood Moon decks, the Mono Red Prison decks, those have been a mainstay ever since I started the series. That's just a deck that appeals to a lot of people. You have Chalices, you have Moons, you have a Fast Clock, you have good threats like Bombardier and Pyrogoyf, solid cards like Fable. Your sideboard options are a bit limited, so if the metagame is too unpredictable, this deck is not the best. Also, I really like it as a choice this week, in particular when, you know, Consign to Memory is bugged. People are tempted to play Moldrazi, stuff like that. So yeah, I like Mono Red Prison, but nothing new is under the sun there. Let's talk about these 3 copies of Doomsday. So I've oftentimes referred to Doomsday as an expert deck. That is still very much the case. When I look at the names, I've seen the names before. Those are dedicated pilots who have played infinitely with the deck, thought of things about the archetype. They're in probably like group chats, discords, whatever, trying to make the best version and helping out each other. So I love to see this when Doomsday does well. I've never been much of a Legacy Doomsday player, but I've been known to play it in Vintage from time to time. So yeah, shout out to you guys. Next column here, we basically have some 2-ofs. We have 2 copies of Helm of Obedience. That card is basically representing these black, you know, it could either be Besieged in Mirror, more stompy style decks, but the whole point is we're playing either ley lines, we're playing Voidwalkers. We're basically trying to say our graveyard hate is good against the field, remember, good against the field, and it has a built-in combos to kind of make it worth it. So very, very impressed with these black decks. I've talked about them before, I believe, at least I've thought about them a lot, that if the metagame becomes, let's say, all you have to do is beat Graveyard, Delver, and Blood Moon, right? Then all of a sudden you're looking pretty good with your basic Swamps and Graveyard Hate and ton of removal, right? So the metagame is, if the metagame is too predictable, we can get into these black hateful decks. Then we have 2 copies of Cloud Post, which is this big mana deck that's kind of bigger than Eldrazi, less, you know, less efficient than Eldrazi, I guess. Probably Mulligan's worse than Eldrazi, but they can kind of go over the top, which is pretty cool. That deck is oftentimes a deck that has very dedicated player base as well. So shout out to you guys for the hard work you do. Who knows? That deck is trying to kick a Myco spawn, so who knows if they benefited from the Consign not being able to get replicated. The deck is kind of a niche deck, but you have your handful of copies that continuously trying to work on the deck, and yeah, that's what you love to see, right? You love to see players dedicating yourself to maybe not the best deck on paper, but with their practice, with their passion, they can get it to be competitive and one of the best decks on any given Sunday. Last column is the one-of column, and that is very, very big today, and that's good. That's a good sign of legacy. I think that's actually something we should try and measure each week. How big is the one-of column? Because we had the Death and Taxes deck. That's done well for a month now. 1 copy, of course, not, you know, the most impressive, but that deck has had like 2 or 3 copies for a month straight. Love to see that. We have Up the Beanstalk Control, which is just somebody's favorite deck that they really like to play. They're very good at it, and they got over the hump and did well. We have Mystic Forge. That's more of a deck that's kind of waiting in the bushes for the format to slow down a little bit. Zero Null Rod's getting played, you know, people focus a lot on the graveyard. Then you can just lose to Mystic Forge, built with a bunch of defense grids, so your counters aren't sufficient. Then this is kind of an Esper mid-range deck. We've talked about this before. People play white for, you know, Teferi and better removal spells in the trade for better, worse mana, rather. Then there's this black mid-range deck, Splashing Blue, which is basically a mono black deck with Kaito and Baleful Strix. So if you don't need Force of Will, let's say you're only battling the graveyard when it comes to Unfair, then not playing Force of Will is just an advantage, kind of like the Helm decks. So really excited to see where that takes us. 1 copy on Sneak and Show, no surprise there. JPA probably was the perpetrator. 1 copy of Grixis Control, again, a player dedicating themselves a lot. I've played against this player a lot in... I think I usually have their number, but I'm always just excited to see, like, you know, Cake Command, Snapcaster. I believe there's always a bunch of cool one-offs that you can kind of get surprised about and easily lose. I always have close games, but yeah, I seem to get the longest straw. Then we have 1 copy of Lance. Again, people dedicating themselves to a deck and reading on internet that lands is not well positioned, take that as a challenge and get to work. And then to round things off, we have one copy of Eldrazi, which is super underwhelming. And I just want to mention this. I don't want to turn this into like pointing fingers or whatever, but when I scroll social media, I see a lot of complaints about Eldrazi. And then whenever I check the stats, the deck is simply not converting anything. So I don't know. I would just imagine that if people are complaining about something, it should be heavily played decks that are crushing week after week. But hey, what do I know? I'm not in the complaining business. So that does it for the 40 decks that ended up doing well. I hope you guys enjoyed that breakdown. Now let's quickly look at some of my suggestions here. So this Leyline of the Void is basically representing fast and hard graveyard hate. So what I mean by that is that something like Pharaoh Macabre is not hard graveyard hate. It is fast, but it's not hard. Leyline is both, so it has a lot of variance, but it is very, very reliable once it's in play. As things stand, it's good against Oops, Reanimator, and Breakfast. So yeah, Leyline of the Void is definitely something you want to consider. Let's say you're on the fence between, what do I know, Ghost Vacuum and Leyline in your mono red deck. Random example. Maybe you should go for Leyline. Then we have Cage here. Cage is a card that I have suggested a lot, but that was back when I thought Nadu would be a big player in the metagame. So these last couple of weeks, it surely has not, but now it's kind of back. So yeah, I definitely suggest Grafdigger's Cage because it's a way to hedge against Nadu decks and graveyard decks, and that's super valuable. Lastly, I want to mention Pyroblast here. Pyroblast is getting slightly better when Nadu is getting better. Dealing with Nadu on the stack is huge compared to, you know, letting it resolve and trying to kill it. So Pyroblast countering Nadu and even countering Illusionist, and all of these decks are Force of Will decks. So that card is just going to bring you a ton of mileage in the week to come. And yeah, there you have it. The breakdown is complete. This was actually one of my favorite episodes because I feel like I was able to highlight reactions to reactions, then a little bit of dynamic with a bugged card online, then a little bit of, you know, huge column over here, and these black decks trying to take advantage of the fact that the format is becoming more and more predictable. So there's actually a lot of layers to this Metagame Monday, and that's basically all I can ask for. If there's any, I'm trying to make sense of these numbers, right? Because anybody could look these numbers up. I'm basically trying to do the boring work and then make it exciting as well. So let me know if I'm doing a good job of that, or I can do anything else. Yeah, I mean, that's going to do it for today's episode. I want to say tomorrow I have a new initiative called Try Hard Tuesday, which is, well, maybe self-explanatory, but it's basically going to be a series where I play decks that I have a lot of practice with, and I'll try my absolute best to do well and basically play that to the highest competitive level. I'll also have a new series on Fridays that's going to be kind of the opposite, where it's more like I'll play some brews, I'll, you know, go in cold with a deck I haven't played before, where the learnings and the exploration and the, you know, the curiosity is more important. So hopefully you guys will check those out, and if not, totally fine. I love that you went and saw this video, and I hope to see you back soon on the channel. Bye guys.